Back in Galatians Chapter 6, where we're chugging along. I really thought we were going to be done the end of this month. Now I think we're going to be done the end of March. Then we'll be done the end of March, unless that changes. Brother Roy, would you open us in a word of prayer this morning?
Thanking you for the church, pastor and our teachers, Father. We just commit them to you today, Father, that they might have wisdom and freedom in the word to teach us what we need to learn. In Jesus' name, amen.
Galatians Chapter 6, we're going to pick it up where we left off, which is going to be Galatians Chapter 6, verse 7. But before we get there, Ben, in my mind, this morning we're going to look at one of the two most twisted scriptures inside the church. Now, I said twisted, and it's very important. Preacher gave the perfect illustration of this on Wednesday night when he was talking about Corinthians 10:13, and it is, there's no temptation taken you but such as is common to man. But God, who is faithful, will not suffer you to be tempted above what you're able, and he'll make a way of escape. Often what happens, I never thought of this verse this way. I never noticed the twist, but it was so clear after he said it. Often what happens is we take there's no temptation taken you, and we twist that to be there's no burden. There's no trial. There's no trial above what you're able. And I understand where it gets that way. Doug, it makes sense because it's in that trial. Okay, when are you tempted to quit? The temptation to quit. When are you tempted to quit? It's in the trial. When are you tempted to get bitter? It's in the trial. When are you tempted for apathy? It's in the trial. I understand how the close association, but it really messes things up when you say to somebody, there's no burden that you can't carry on your own. Because the whole picture is we can't carry it on our own. It really messes at the core. And so when you begin to take a look at verses like that get twisted, they cause huge problems. I've never thought of that verse as one that gets twisted until Wednesday. Preacher, as I told you this morning in confession, it was actually Thursday, so I must not have paid attention to it when you said it Wednesday. Or maybe it just took twice for it to get all the way through. It was halfway through. But I'll always see it that way now. And it is something that I'll never look at that verse again. Matt, I'll never look at that verse again without fighting for the fact that realize this is not a burden. We have the right to be burdened. In fact, our burdens are crucial to driving us. But there are two other verses that I would put into that category. One, I remember in my 20s reading somewhere that this is the most quoted verse in America. And we tend to think in the church the most quoted verse in America is that one. And there probably was a time in America where it was that one. But the most quoted verse in America these days is not that one. It is, judge not that you be not judged. And if you want to talk about a verse that gets twisted, Hank, I understand it getting twisted out there. I understand outside these walls saying, judge not, are you judging me? But you know where that verse gets said the most? It's inside this group right here. Are you judging me? Stop judging me. And you want to talk about a twisted verse? Yeah, Doug, I guarantee you somebody in school says this every single day. A teacher tries to talk to a kid, that kid walks away. I don't have to pay any attention to them. They're just judging me. Verse is twisted. Judgment there, by the way, is talking about it's talking about sentencing or action or how you respond or motive. That's what judges are trying to do. Judges are trying to find out, okay, what's the sentence? Or you're going inside to find out why you did something. Well, it's turned into, we're supposed to have no opinion, we're supposed to walk blind, we're supposed to accept everything. That goes against with everything we just spent the last couple of weeks looking at. Bear you one another's burdens, but you can't be paying attention to find out somebody's burdened. Brethren, you which are spiritual, if a man be overtaken in a fault, restore such a one. But you can't be paying attention to find out they're overtaken in a fault. Brother Rod, I'll tell you something else that just catches me. You know, the people who always say, are you judging me? Don't be judging me. Stop judging me. They're also the first people to quote, if it looks like an onion, it smells like an onion, it tastes like an onion, it's an onion. But don't apply that to me. And it just gets so twisted, it ends up being, let me do what I want to, where I want to, and remove all family responsibility inside the church. It's just crazy. Oh, here. I scribbled through this because I probably shouldn't do it, but I'm going to do it anyway, because it's really crucial to me. Inside of me. Doug, if you want to know something inside of me, which I know you don't, thank you for that. That's why we get along so well. But I'm really trying on not being so sarcastic too, but I'm struggling. Pray for me. But you know, there's this great verse in Luke 6. It's written in red too. It says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. So if we're really talking about judge not that you be not judged, we're really talking about where that fits in. But you know, I don't have to judge people. They tell on themselves. Rebellion in the heart flows out of the mouth. Bitterness in the heart flows out of the mouth. Malice in the heart flows out of the mouth. And brother, I don't have to worry about sentence either, because you know what? His word tells me how to respond. You know, when we get into judge not that you be not judged, that really is truly, in my opinion, one of the most twisted verses. I'll give you another one. We're going to look at it this morning. Galatians Chapter 6. Let's start in verse 1. We're going to start in verse 7, but really is one flow of thought. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one. There's our responsibility. Here's our warning. In the spirit of meekness, considering ourselves, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Is there anything more important than that? You want to know what's the greatest law? Well, here's him answering it, and here's him telling us how to carry it out. For if a man think himself, another warning, by the way, to be something when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone, and not in his other, the danger of comparison. For every man shall bear his own burden. Let him that is taught in the word communicate unto him that teacheth in all good things. Next week we'll come back, and that little phrase right there, in all good things, will be crucial. Because, Dr. Bohr, when we get down to verse 9, and let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Get to verse 10, as we therefore have opportunity, let us do good unto all men. Okay. Back here in verse 6, when he's talking about him that doeth good, that gives us a real tip to what he's going to be talking about in verses 9 and 10 when he's talking about us well-doing and doing good. Okay, and Doug, it's not delivering a pie to our neighbor, because the Buddhist guy across the street can deliver a pie to the neighbor, and the Mormon behind him can deliver a pie to the neighbor. It's much more than a pie to the neighbor. Okay, and it's signified and gives us that illustration when we go back to verse 6 here. This is where, keeping it in context, Paul defines the verse, defines what his topic is for himself just a few verses before. So anyway, chapter 6, verse 7, and here's where we go. I truly believe this is one of those twisted verses, and it really, as much as judge not that you be not judged, then it causes a problem. Okay. Be not deceived. God is not mocked, to where every person in here should be bursting. Dr. Bohr, our God will not be made of no effect. Now, you know what Paul accused the very Galatians of, making Christ of no effect. Right now, he's telling them he will not be made inconsequential. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Now, very important. Brother Allen, I really do try to manage time. So I try to just push forward. But before we push forward into this verse, we have to put it back in context, or we're going to miss something. You know where Galatians 6, 7 resides? Inside the book of Galatians. Okay. So from Galatians Chapter 6, 1 till the end of this book, he's dealing with a certain idea. And this is the close. This is the close dealing with that idea. So let's just get back in the frame of mind who he's talking to, what he's talking about. Galatians Chapter 6, go back to verse 1. We're going to go through this hopefully really fast. Galatians 6 is a group of churches in the area of Galatia. Yes? Yes. So these are churches. These are people who were running well. These are people who once were lost and now are not. Fair? That's who makes up the church. These are people who were once running well, and Paul would write to them, verse 6, I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel. A group of people who were running well. A group of people who had turned their back on self and the world and were now living and telling and walking by the Spirit. Maybe even walking by the Spirit, Miss Brucci. But all of a sudden, in comes legalism. In comes the Judaizers. And they said, faith is important. Yes, there must be faith. You can't not have faith. But you sanctify yourself. You complete this thing. You finish this thing by the law. If we're not careful, that almost makes sense to us, doesn't it? We started to see the twist in the very beginning of this book. This is who he's writing to. It is your self-effort. It is your commitment. This is what will finish it. Problem, the Galatians did not understand the gospel. So he goes into the defense of the gospel. Jump over to chapter 2, verse 20. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Crucified. My flesh. Dr. Lewis, how am I supposed to do something in my flesh when my flesh is crucified? I can't. Not only could I not do it before, when my flesh was, quote unquote, for quick illustration, alive, because the flesh isn't alive, but when my flesh had some power and influence over me, I couldn't do it then. Now my flesh is crucified. Can I do it now? For sure I can't do it. Here's the very gospel. You can't do it. I'm crucified. You're crucified. Nevertheless, you live. You don't live in the flesh, but Christ lives in you, inside of you. Inside now, Brother Roy, we have the Spirit of God. Here's the gospel. Dead, made alive, and you hath he quickened, made alive. Ephesians Chapter 2. And so he goes on and he's teaching them this wonderful truth. Yes, you don't live by the law. You live by faith, in love, through the Spirit, which resides inside of you. It's not in the flesh. Chapter 3. O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you, that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ hath been evidently set forth, crucified among you. He goes back to this picture. Okay, it's that simple, but you guys are twisted. You're deceived. You're not seeing it right. So, explained in chapter 1, explained in chapter 2. Guess what he's going to do in chapter 3? Because they don't see it. He's not giving up. He's going to explain it. So he goes on into chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 3. Are you so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are you now made perfect by the flesh? Guess what he says? Well, we just got done saying. Do you really think that the Spirit sanctified you and made you alive, and now something in your flesh is going to sanctify you? Now you're made alive, now you can carry it out in your flesh. No, your flesh is dead. Your flesh can do no good thing. Chapter 3. Here, wait a minute. I'm trying to hurry, Brother Allen. I'm trying. I can't get you in trouble. Miss Sherry's not here. Unless she watches. Let's just say, because this is how I think. It's problematic. That's why Doug doesn't get in there. But you, unfortunately, we think the same. I wouldn't admit that either. Let's just say that there was something we could do in our flesh. That the pressure is for us to now carry it out in our flesh. And now it's for us to sanctify ourselves and to finish it and to go forth. And it is our commitment and it's our self-control and it's for us to do. Okay, let's just say that's true. It's not, but let's just say that is. Then here's my question. Okay. I'm asking a smart guy because I want the good answer. Well, then cheat off the paper and you turn in, and cheat. Boom. Here you go. I'm afraid of him. So here you go. Don't make me say those things out loud. So here you go. If it is for you to do, what good thing can you do that's righteous? What good thing can you do that's holy? All of our righteousnesses is what? So if it's up to you, it's up to you. You sanctify, you commit, you pull this off, the best that you have. Your righteousnesses. What hope do we have? That's what he's trying to, all through the book of Galatians, this is what he's trying to, you keep going back to, all right, Hank, your life is a mess. Let me give you self-help from the Baptist church. Go help yourself. No, this whole book is about you cannot help yourself. Because you can't help yourself, he came, he died, he loves you, he made you alive, and he, which hath begun a good work in you, is faithful to perform it until the end. Chapter 4, he gets into the big illustration of the two sons. Abraham had two sons. Gets to the end in chapter 4, verse 31. So then, brethren, we are not the children of the bondwoman, not under the law, but we are of the free. Chapter 5. Stand fast, therefore, on the liberty wherewith thou hast made us free. Stand fast on freedom. Be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. You know what that yoke of bondage is? It's putting yourself under the law. Let's not do that. But freedom, it makes us nervous. It's scary, right? Remember, Doug? If there's no law, people will do whatever they want to. They'll go crazy. Verse 13, for brethren, of chapter 5, for brethren, ye have been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. Here's that picture again. You want to fulfill the law of Christ. Verse 16, spent a lot of time in verse 16 to verse 26. Verse 16, this I say then, it is the only commandment in this passage. The only imperative, the only thing you and I must do, Dr. Lewis, is verse 16. This I say, you want the answer? Here's the answer. Walk in the Spirit, ye shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. Okay. Nowhere in this passage does it say, stir up love. It does not say stir up long suffering. It definitely does not say stir up temperance. Stir up self-control. Brother Moore, you who has no self-control in your flesh, use your flesh to stir up self-control so that you can have the fruit of self-control. And if we keep saying that enough times, we'll get so confused, it might make sense. No, you walk in the Spirit. What does that mean? Well, what's life to you? What's life to you? If life to you is Christ, if life to you is His wisdom, it's His leading, it's His thought. Remember all this coming back? Because this is months ago. Then he gets to verse 19, and he gives us a picture of what it looks like if we're walking in the flesh. It's a very scary picture, actually, because, full of drama and through of sensuality and through of division and full of strife. And if we're honest, sometimes our life is full of those things in that list, not full of the things in the list to follow, which is a key warning, like a temperature thermometer. Boom, 100, probably sick. Boom, strife, division, sensuality, probably sick, probably flesh. Then he gets to verses 22. But the fruit of the Spirit is, we spent time there. All of this gets us back to this picture in chapter 6. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault. Now we pulled this verse out. But you put this verse back in context. Guess what the fault he's probably overtaken in? This whole book is about contrast. Walking in the flesh, walking in the Spirit. Doug, Paul's writing this book to you and to me, and he knows, you know what's so easy for us to do? To wake up on Monday and live Monday in the flesh. Doc, you know what's so easy for you to do? Wake up on Monday, live Monday in the flesh. You know what you have Doug for? Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, Monday was your good day, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, because Tuesday may be your bad day, and you're going to need him to help refocus you. It's not in the flesh. In the flesh is no good thing. The works of the flesh will bring about division and strife and drama. This passage, guess who he's writing? Brother Hamilton, you see who he's writing this passage to? So, when he gets to chapter 6, verse 7, he's directing it to the same group of people. Be not deceived. God is not going to be mocked. This is written to one who refuses to let go of the flesh, of what he can accomplish. A person whose security, whose value is in his performance. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. Doesn't that sound bad? Miss Pat, I've grown up in churches, and we will fight tooth and nail for externals. Things on the outside, things we can do. There is no way we will let those go, because those things are our security. Those things are our value. Those things are what proves us to be okay. I'm okay. I'm at Sunday school with a tie. I'm going to go home and yell and scream and argue and cuss and spend and lust, but my externals look good. With that in mind, let's look at 6:7. A big old long porch. Matt, I don't see any way around it. See, we don't go through that porch. You know who this verse is to? It's to all you who are messing up. Be not deceived. God's not mocked. Your judgment is coming. Your day is coming. Can my heart be any more full of malice? But the truth is, this verse is written to me. First, there's a statement of the law. Secondly, it's going to be followed by an explanation of this law. At first glance, be not deceived, God is not mocked. Mocked is such a harsh word. It's not saying God's not ignored, it says God's not mocked. God will not be mocked. You look up that word mocked, it has this idea of, it has the words for nose and up. It literally is the idea of turning your nose up to God. Look, I'm going to do what I want to. I'm going to get away with it. I'm going to make God of no consequence. I'm going to show him to be weak when it comes to my life. Man, I can ignore him, do what I want to, and so what? You know what? My best friend may catch me once in a while. My spouse may catch me once in a while. My kids may catch me once in a while. But God, I mean, how crazy is that? I'll make it of no consequence. And what he's talking about is living in what we can do. Living in our flesh. Accomplishing it ourselves. At first glance, just this whole idea, mocking God, comes across harsh. Then there's a second thing. Ben, there's a second thing that just catches my attention. I mean, I haven't even got really into this. I'm just thinking, you know what Paul's doing right here? Of course you do, because you know you're a smart guy and all that. But he's giving a law. Paul, who's just got done telling us basically to be dead to the law. What's the law? The law is a heavy burden. The law is this too much for you. The law brings you to death. The purpose of the law is to bring you to death. He's giving a law. Doug, that's not ironic? So I started to think about that, and before we get into it, we're going to see something. And I think this is, Miss Janice, this is brilliant. I pray that I can be like this when I talk to people. I really do. Because you know who Paul's talking to? He's talking to those who are prone to legalism. And you know how you get the attention of a legalist? Okay. I'm 52, I think. I'm 52 for 20 years. This is how I got the attention of legalists. Freedom! 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 You want to know how well this worked? Say the word freedom to a legalist. La 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 la. No. You say it to me, my neck goes, and I'm careful about every word you're about to say. No, Paul's not doing that. You know how you get, Ben, you know how you get the attention? You know how you get the ears of the legalist? You get over onto his ground a little bit. By the way, Bruce, this is how he argues with you and never argues. Because he goes over onto your ground a little bit and he gives you what you want. And pretty soon you're like, man, I'm stupid. Let's just end this. You're my idol, Ben. He goes over on his ground. Paul, you know the guy who said, I'll become all things to all men that I might win some? He goes over to their ground a little bit and he gives them something they might understand. Let me give you law. And they said, Paul's finally getting with it. It took a long time, but we're winning. He's finally to understand this law. Only I don't like that clock. Only this whole thing that's bubbling up right here scares me to death. Because what they're doing is he's finally getting with it. You know, he's finally on board. If you're going to live holy, you have to plant holiness. Let me tell you, that makes sense. If we didn't have this big, long introduction, I could say that, and people would be like, yeah, that's right. That's exactly what Paul is talking about. Here, let's go back to here. All right, plant whatever you want to in your own flesh. Brother Hank, what can you plant that's holy? If we're not careful, I just twisted it and made it about what we can do. That's what this is about. How do you reach a legalist? You go over on that side, and you get their attention. I mean, I picture, he's fishing. Boop. And they're getting all excited. That bait looks really good on that hook. Back to our divine principle. Let's go through this a little bit. Then we'll see him set the hook. Eric, you got those verses ready for me? Divine principle. Divine principles are always true. That's what makes them a divine principle. We're going to get there. Hold it right there. They cannot be broken. There is no exception to a divine principle. When the preacher talks about he must come, there must be payment for sin, that's because that's a divine principle. What he's giving us here is a divine principle. What you sow is what you grow. Divine principle. Okay? And we go through that. We know that. That's true. That could be true at work. At work, it can be divine principle. What you sow is what you grow. Put it up. It'll make sense. If you work really hard, you'll sow higher profits, which means better bonuses. It'll make sense. It's true. What you sow is what you grow. You don't plant rutabagas, you don't get tomatoes. Rutabagas get rutabagas. What you sow is what you grow. Morally, you don't plant Playboy, and reap purity. Okay? You don't go home and plant anger and pouting and guilt and receive openness and trust and dependence. Okay? Those things don't happen. I don't blow up like the angry man and expect my wife to come hug me. Because you know what happens when I blow up like the angry man? I don't see her for a little while. Okay, that's what you sow is what you grow. Okay, divine principle. Makes sense. It's also very biblical. Job 4:8, even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity, sow it, and sow wickedness, you're going to reap the same. Give me the next one. Therefore shall they eat of the fruit of their own way, and be filled with their own devices. You plant it, you sow it, you reap it. Divine principle. Give me the next one. Hosea. This made famous by Billy the Kid. For they have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. It hath no stock, the bud shall yield no meal. If so be it yield, the stranger shall swallow it up. There he even goes further. You know, that's talking about you sow one seed, you get lots of fruit from one plant. It don't just stop with her hiding in the other room. It continues on. It continues on for days and days and weeks and weeks. And it affects those boys who watched it. And it affects, that's, you sow wind, you reap whirlwind. Divine principle. So, I'm still stuck like this. I'm still stuck. He's giving them the law. I'll give you a second thing. He starts out, second ironic twist. He starts out, be not deceived. Well, Paul already thought this. Galatians Chapter 3, verse 1. O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you? Be not deceived. You know what he already thought? That they were deceived. Let me give you another nugget when you're talking to other people. You know what? He's not looking down on them. You know, right here when he begins this one-on-one counsel, he gives them value. He lifts them back up. He's already challenged their thought, but now he's lifting them up and bringing them to this place. Did Paul forget Galatians 3:1? Did Paul forget everything No, with everything that's inside of him, he's fighting for their life. He didn't forget anything. He did not forget, Doc. But you know what he says? Don't be deceived. There's immediately some value and some respect. In fact, you know what I think? I think there's immediately this. Ready? Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, you which are spiritual, Paul qualifies. Right? Restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself. You know what I see Paul doing right here? Spirit of meekness, considering Paul. I just love this chapter. Don't you love this chapter? I love this chapter. Brother, you know, I always use you. Here, let me just say this out loud. Because I think you're wise enough to see the errors in me. And I think you're kind enough to bring them to my attention without bashing me over the head. So I don't mind ever being exposed to you. There you go. Consider thyself, lest thou also be tempted. It creates an openness in the church. By the way, John tells us we should walk in light, not darkness. We should have a spirit of openness, not secretive, hiding. Oh, we got to hurry. All right, so got to hurry. So we see the divine principle. Got the divine principle? Got the divine principle? What you sow is what you grow. How does it apply here? Because this is, I think, where we, not careful, twist it. Well, I want you to notice something. Maybe you have before, maybe you haven't. Verse 7, be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man sow. Verse 7 is talking about seed. It's talking about what you plant. Okay, now if verse 8 continued on that way, it would make sense to say, Doc, if you want holiness, plant holiness. That would make sense. But that's not what verse 8 does. Okay, verse 8 does not talk about seed. For he that soweth, planting the seed, to his flesh, shall of the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth to the Spirit, shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. I'm not talking about seed anymore. Now he's talking about fields. He's talking about where you sow, or how you sow. Because we've already decided, if it was talking about seed, what you can plant, what holy thing you plant, nada. Nothing I have. He alone is holy. Then I can do. That's why he's done it. That's why the command is, walk in the Spirit. Only command in that passage. I don't do this very often. I mean, I can't remember doing this in years. But I did this morning just to see. I just wanted to see. And I probably would have not done this if we weren't supposed to finish this passage 3 weeks ago in my notes. But when you have things to do over, preacher, when you have things to do over week after week after week, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And you just keep looking. So I took this passage and I looked it up in the NIV and I looked it up in some other translation I didn't even know. You know, when you go to the NIV, which, you know, we were like, well, it scared me. Preacher, it scared me. Because when you look it up in the NIV, it talks about to please. For he that sows to please his flesh. Well, nowhere in there are the words to please. That is somebody adding what they think. This is not talking about you doing things to please your flesh, to make your flesh happy. It's talking about what you depend on, what for you is life. He's had the same definition of flesh through the entire book. He didn't change it in one verse. He's fought the same fight through the entire book. It didn't change right here. That's an interpreter trying to tell us what they think it means. And then the other one was even worse, and I don't even remember what it was. It was like some New Living something or other, blah, 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 I don't know. But it was to sanctify, he that sows to sanctify their own sinful nature. Roy, it broke my heart this morning. Because if I'm honest, most of the time that's how I've heard this verse preached my entire life. That's how I've taught it. This is about what field we depend on. Are we sowing our time, our effort, our hopes, our thoughts? That's our seed. Are we sowing that in flesh, in self-effort, in what we can do? When I wake up in the morning, do I evaluate my day and say, here's how I'm going to get it done? When problem comes, do I try to find the best way to solve this problem without causing the most? At what point do I depend on him, that field? Where am I living in that field? At what point is he life to me? Where do I want what he can do? Doug, 2 weeks ago, were you here 2 weeks ago? Oh, well, 2 weeks ago, you need to go back and listen to 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, when we were talking about self-control, we tied it into this idea. Well, we talked about it for 2 weeks. You heard it the first time. You finished it, I'm sorry. We talked about it begins with our desire, our passion. What's life to us? Remember that? Okay, well, that's what we're talking about here. What's life to us? And then we talked about, well, depending on what's life to us, that's what we're going to think on. That's where our mind is going to be. Philippians 4:8, think on these things, truth, goodness, honesty. And then what that's going to bring about is what we desire and what we think on. It's going to be what we do. We do what we desire. That's why we have to rationalize things to make them okay so we can do them. We're going to accomplish our desire. So, give you the desires of your heart. If you desire his will, that's easy for that to happen, isn't it? He gets to do what he wanted, which he's going to do anyway. Be not deceived, God's not mocked. Then it goes to this practice, this choice of actions, what we're going to do. And then we ended it with this idea of partnership. Okay? It's just waking up every morning depending. In that desire, in that commitment, in that seek, in that thought, living the day, walking in his spirit. I'll give you 2 verses for this. Eric, you got Colossians 3? Paul again, because Paul's fighting the same fight everywhere. You got all 3 verses. Well, I don't know, not here. If ye then, being risen with Christ, Christians, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. You know where our mind should be? There we go. It should be here. And if we're not careful, we spend too much time concentrating on here, and we wonder about why we are living in the flesh. Paul would write this to the Philippians, Philippians Chapter 3. Brethren, Christians, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk so as ye have us for an example. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping. Here, we should all weep with Paul right here. That they are the enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is their shame. Here you go. whose mind is on earthly things. Anyway, somehow I let that clock get away. So here we got to close, which means we're going to be back here next week. We have a choice every day of where we're going to sow our seed. We will either sow it in the field of the flesh, or we will sow it dependently in the field of the Spirit. We will reap where we sow. And next week we'll kind of get an idea of what that looks like, and then jump into the last two verses. Dr. Lewis, you close in a word of prayer?